welcome to this lesson on how to draw a lichen-covered branch with me, Bethany Milam. So this is following on from a workshop that I have been doing previously. You can see where we've been drawing a kingfisher in coloured pencils. If you're interested in looking at that full workshop, you'll find the links in the description below. So what we started off in that last workshop is to create a little bit of where the lichen is covering over the top of our kingfisher, just in this sort of lower section. And this was needed to be done before the kingfisher got drawn in, because it is going over the top, over the edge. Now the way that I did that is with an indentation tool or an indenting tool, and this is basically just metal sort of nib, and you can see it's got a round ball on the end. So anything that's going to make a furrow or an indentation in your paper but not cut the paper is going to be ideal for this technique. So you can indent just on white paper, but you can also indent on green. And so what I have done is I've drawn the green lines with those little fronds coming up over the edge, and then I have indented over the top of those. So you're just pushing down to make a furrow in the paper, and then you can colour the darker, in this case orange kingfisher, over the top of that. And what you're going to be left with are the lighter green strands where you have indented them showing up underneath. So this is a really good technique if you've got anything where they've got lines or very small areas that are over the top of a darker something or other, in this case our kingfisher in the background. And that's what I've done in this section. But let's look at the rest of the branch now. So how do you cope with so much texture and lots of different patterns and shapes all going on in this branch? It looks lovely, but how do you draw it? So my advice is to start with either pencil or with a lighter coloured pencil and start to draw some of the main shapes in. And you can see that's what I've got in my drawing at the moment. So I've been going around putting in basic shapes to define some of the different parts of different species of lichen that we've got on here. So we won't worry about that too much, but it is going to be really concentrating on different shapes. Once you've got some shaping, then the next stage is to look at the gaps. You can call these negative shapes, you can call them shadows, but we're just going to look for the dark shapes in the lichen. So it might be that you're seeing some dark shapes in the middle. You're going to see dark shapes around the edge where we are coming to the branch. And if you've got different types of lichen, there will be dark shapes where those meet, where there's a bit of a gap forming. And so you can start to think about where those dark shapes are going to go. And we're going to draw those in first. This is something that I don't do so much, as drawing in the dark first. I tend to work, I think of it as a very sort of watercolory kind of method. I always go light to dark. But in this case, it's going to be so much easier to put the darks in first and then put the light colours over the top. So in order to work out where I need to put those dark shapes, I am just going to almost create myself a little map of shape. So I'm drawing where I think those dark shapes are going to need to go. And when you're doing this in just a sort of light pencil to start off with, you can change your mind. You can make them bigger, smaller, move them about. Anything that you need to do. There's no pressure at this point of getting them right. And again, every bit of lichen is going to be a bit different. So if your shapes do vary a little bit from what you're seeing in your reference, it's not going to be the end of the world. As long as you've got the feel of the kind of shapes that are occurring, that is the main thing. You don't have to get every tiny little bit exactly the same, unless you're doing a very sort of scientific illustration. Then you probably are not too worried about getting absolute perfection in the areas of lichen. It's more just try to get a feel for the kind of edges and shapes that you're seeing. So how curly are the edges? Is the shape, the structure kind of flat? Does it have any sort of cup type shapes on it? Is it a shield kind of lichen where you've got these sort of curly shapes that are quite flattened? Or are there lots of little strands and almost hairy kind of textures? And then have a think about how you are going to map out some of those darker shapes within whatever you're seeing. So I'm just drawing little edges that I can come back to and hopefully work out where I'm going to put some of the darks and where I want to leave areas of much lighter, well, areas that I'm going to put much lighter colour on later on. So let's, quite like that little funny strand coming down here, so we'll make sure we get that mapped in as well. And this is something where it might take a while to draw, so you could do little section by little section. You don't have to try and do all of it at once to the same stage. So I'm just going to focus on this little area first and then work my way up. So for the dark colour, what dark are you seeing? It might be that you see brown, if you can see through to the branch. If the branch is brown, you might be seeing more grey. You might even be seeing blue or purple. So it's entirely up to you and what you can see as to which dark colour you put in. I would suggest go for a cooler brown if you're putting a brown in, unless your branch is very obviously warm, but it's going to contrast more with your bird generally, which tends to have more warm browns in it if it has browns. If you are seeing, in this case, I'm seeing quite a bit of blue shadow, then we want to go very dark, so I'm going to go for dark indigo. And of course you can layer up your dark colours. So if I decide at any point I want to go back and put some brown on, I will. I've pulled out a walnut brown. That's a rather good one, nice and dark. The idea is that you want to create nice contrasts between your tones. So let's start off by putting in some of these little shapes in the middle of this lichen. And you can see I'm working with a sharp pencil, which means that I can come into these tiny little shapes and get nice clear edges. And that's going to be key to this as well. You don't want to have fuzzy edges in your dark shapes, unless you are seeing fuzzy edges, but I don't expect you will be the most part of this. if your lichen is a bit out of focus, then you can get away with it. But if as it is, it's nice and clear in the reference, it makes sense to also have it nice and clear, especially sort of underneath the bird. If it's sort of going over here and further away, then we might play with making things fuzzy, but not now. Right, so let's have just a look at what little shapes. And if you don't like the shape that you originally drew, you come back to it and go, no, I'm seeing something different now. You can, of course, change the shape. You can add more. The closer you look, the more dark shapes you will start to see. There comes a point where you have to stop and go, right, that is enough detail. But I would suggest, once you've got the main dark sort of shapes in, if you can see a few more that you can just add, as long as you're not going completely overboard, carry on. I also find that if you sort of squint your eyes at your reference, it does help you to see the light and dark shapes more clearly as well. The other thing you can do is to make your reference into grayscale, and then you will be able to see the lights and darks more clearly, where you don't have the colour distracting you. If you're enjoying drawing along with me, remember to like the video, write a comment below and subscribe to my channel for more videos. So if you're seeing a slightly different kind of edge, maybe it's a lot more raggedy, play with how you're putting on the dark colour to create those edges. Think about using graduation into certain areas. So if you're right at the edge of a piece of lichen, it's quite dark. As you go away from that, does it start to lighten up a little bit? So is the shadow gradual, or does the shadow come to a very sudden stop? And again, if you're using your dark colour to define an edge even more, think about cutting into that shape and putting in more fine details if you think you can see those, and just play with that. Have fun creating little textural shapes. Some of these lichens can be quite sort of folded in places and have almost sort of mini shadows where there are folds and layers. If you want to put some of those in with your very dark colour, but just with a very, very light coating of pencil, then you can try doing that, or you can leave those to using a slightly lighter colour later on. With the more frond-like or grass-like lichens, then you're going to be seeing possibly smaller, more irregular kind of shapes in between the strands, and that might be a little bit trickier. So again, take your time just looking, what dark shapes can you see, and go small to start off with. You can always make those shapes a bit bigger if you decide that they need to go bigger. And then you can work within the main dark shapes that you've put and start to define some of those fronds of green a little bit more. So if you've got a long strand here, you want to make sure that that continues down, it doesn't sort of disappear halfway. So you could put some dark either side of it. It doesn't have to be outlined, but just a few shapes either side to help define that that is a strand that continues all the way down. If there is a net kind of pattern, think about the dark shapes you would see in between netting and use that to help you put in the rest of the shapes that you're seeing. And again, if you decide actually I don't want that bit in there, then you can always put some more dark and cover it up. So coloured pencils is very easy to work over the top of and just cover up some of these lighter shapes and colours that you may have put in. But it's good to sort of just go hesitant to start off with. Don't get rid of too much until you have decided where those dark shapes are absolutely going to go. Where are they most needed? And as I said, if you get something that's different to what you're seeing in the reference, don't panic. Just try and get the impression of the kind of structures and shapes you're seeing. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't have every little strand and shape in exactly the same place. It's just fun. Just have fun with it. Another thing to just take notice of is if you are working against white and you're going to keep your background white, then if you've got an edge or a little strand that comes out over here, not against a branch, don't put dark around that because it's just going to have light around the edge most likely. It might have a little bit of shadow, so there's I haven't actually drawn it in, but there's a little bit in here that's sort of darkish on one side, and then I can do a bit of a form shadow to it, but I don't want to do a dark outline around that. I want to keep it light, so this is just in the lighter blue that I used. I don't want to go over that with my dark. Only where I am seeing a shadow do I want to put the dark indigo. If you are having a background, you're going to put in sort of a grey green or something behind all of it, then that colour could be used for some of your outlining as an alternative. It's just got to make sense with what you're intending to put on. So let's get a bit of shadow around a little bit under the feet, but also I am aware that some of this might need to sort of almost look like it's slightly coming over the edge, which I didn't indent over the feet, but that's area I could have done a bit more indenting. We'll see what happens. Let's just do a few little dashes coming down so it feels a little bit sort of grassy over there. So we've got sort of more of the the little strands of lichen implied as coming up over there. I think I've put so much dark just in here. What I want to do is take some of that out. So if you use a kneadable eraser and you've got a tiny area you want to take out, you can mold this into a little shape. Nice and thin, almost blade kind of shape, and you can use that to just gently remove some of the pencil. I'm using Polychromos pencils and they do erase quite easily, I find, so that's always a plus with this video. Now also, if that's not going to give you enough pencil removed, then this is a battery eraser, and you can use it without the battery as well if it's just got a fine tip and you want to get into a very small area, but you can also use the battery and it will take off a nice clean small area. I can work my way around and sort of make that a little bit less of a regular shape. Yeah, I think that'll be better. I'm going to also put some dark indigo just on the lower side of the branch down here as well. So that is my my darkest shapes put in, and at this point I can decide, do I think any of them need to go darker? Do I want to add a different colour to put some more variation into those dark shapes? If the answer is yes, then you layer up, and in this case I am going to go in with the brown. This is walnut brown in the Polychromos range, and it's quite a cool brown, but it works well over the top of the indigo to just make those dark shapes even darker. I'm also going to put some in the branch. I will continue my branch further down. And of course you can pick and choose where you want to go back over with the brown. If you think a particular little shape is dark enough as it is, then you don't need to go over it again. And you can also divide up your dark shape. So if you think only half of it or a section of it needs to go darker, then draw what you're seeing, and that's going to give you a more realistic impression of the structures and the shapes that you're seeing in the lichen. Okay, so now I've got those dark shapes on, I can come across with some lighter colours. Now this is quite a bluey kind of lichen. It's a very bluish colour. So I am going to use some light ultramarine. So this is just going to be my first layer of light colour, and I'm using extremely gentle pressure and just shading over the top of those light shapes that I've left. So when you're shading with coloured pencil, if you are doing sort of very light layers, you want to either be holding your pencil much higher up, or and it can be and or hold your pencil with your hand over the top so that you can have more of the side of your pencil touching the page rather than the tip. So that way you're going to get immediately a lighter pressure and keep everything nice and gentle, stop you from pressing down too hard and getting lines where you don't want them. Now into that, I'm going to start building in a few different variations of colour. So this again, it's up to you what you use, but I because it's quite blue, I'm thinking I might put some cobalt green into some of the areas that look a bit more turquoisey. There's a little patch, or maybe a couple of patches that look a bit more bright green, so this is light green. And then I've got May green, which is a little bit more of an earthy green as well, to calm things down. So if you can see a hint more of any particular colour, then layer it over. But also, if you are seeing more tone or shadowed areas, then you want to play with layering up tonal values as well. And that means that you're still thinking about where are there more shadows, where is there more light, at the same time as you're thinking, is this a bit more turquoise or is this a bit more green? And that's a lot to think about. So this is again somewhere you want to take your time and concentrate on just those tiny little shapes. It can be quite sort of meditative once you get into the flow of just, I'm looking at this shape now, and then I'm looking at another shape, and what tonal colour am I seeing in here? So just take your time and enjoy layering up the colours and the tonal values that you're seeing. So this again is where I'm going to go back to my natural tendency of light to dark, working gradually from that very, very light first layer of blue, adding greens and turquoises until I'm seeing something that starts to resemble the lichen-covered branch in the reference. Okay, so I've got a little bit more colour and tone on. I am going to start to define some more edges. So if you've got still some large light shapes, you might sort of see that there is a little bit more going on inside of those shapes, and you can start to create more edges within that. If you need to go back to a slightly darker colour, you can do so. If you can create that edge with a slightly lighter colour, then that's going to add more variation as well. So I might use a slightly sort of a dark green rather than going for the very dark blues and browns to define a little bit of where we've got layers of this sort of shield-like and built up on top of each other, and find a way of just getting in a few more little shapes and edges that are going to help create the impression of that layered up and sort of crinkled, it's almost like folds in material impression of the lichen there. So if you want to think about, first of all, hard edges, very clear cut lines that you're putting in. So if you've got one edge on top of another edge, like so, this edge is going to have a very clear definition, whereas if you've got a sort of gentle scoop, then this might have a shadow somewhere in the middle of it, but it's going to probably be a little bit more subtle and graduated. So I would just have a little look and think to yourself, is this shape that I'm seeing created with a hard edge, or is it created by a subtle graduation of tone? And try to vary how much you're putting in of one or the other, so you don't have too much of the hard edges and you don't have too many graduated edges either. You've got a nice mishmash of both of them. That's what we're going to aim for. And remember that you're if you are doing this with a subject sitting on the branch like I am, your kingfisher is also going to likely be casting some shadows. So look out for any shadow underneath, especially when we get into this section, next section along, underneath our kingfisher, or under the feet. Does that need a little bit more shadow in there? And if you've got a little bit less defined type of lichen, or this bit looks like it's half rubbed away from the branch, you might at that point start to do almost a scribble type texture, where you are sort of going over and creating a random scribbly mark. And again, that you can use, but use it without too much of a repetition. So you want lots of variation within that. Sometimes you might find that using the pencil on its side gives a slightly more pleasing kind of mark, and you just want to have as much variety in your mark making as possible. So you could do some dashes and dots as well. But again, just work with what you're seeing and then play with putting variation in on top of that. So a few little dots, I think it's just going to add a touch more texture. That's going to make this look a little bit more exciting. Okay, so that's our first little section of lichen done. What I'm just looking at is the branch underneath, and this, again, it could have a little bit more colour in it, a few more layers maybe. I think I'm actually seeing a bit of purple, a hint of purple in this branch. I'm not sure what tree this is, but I'm going to put a little bit of a purple layer sandwiched in here, because that's also going to be quite exciting as a little bit of variation and contrast. And again, if you can see some of that purple colour in one area, it's always good to place it in a few more areas as well. So as we work our way up, I'll be sure to just add a few hints of purple here and there. Again, be cautious, don't overdo it. But if you can see there's a bit of purple or a bit of red or something unusual hinted at in the rest of the colours, then it's always a bit of fun to add that in. I'm going to put another layer of brown over the top of that, working darker underneath, graduating up. And where I've got this shininess, again, there's two ways of doing this. You could simply work your way around that shape, but I'm going to use a bit of reductive drawing, and by that I mean I'm going to rub it out. So the shiny bit is going to just be created again with kneadable eraser and just pulling out that lighter shape from the layers that I put on. And why I do that? Well, it means that you've got several layers of colour that are going to be hinted at there underneath where you're rubbing out. So it's, again, it's just a different way of working. And if you prefer to just make sure you recognise that light shape and you're leaving it, then you can absolutely just layer up and work your way around your lighter shapes. That's absolutely fine as well. Right, I'm just going to put a few little shapes in the tree bark. A little hint there's texture going on in here. And then I think that's probably about done. So moving on to the next section, again I'm just going to treat it in exactly the same way by first of all mapping out where I want the dark shapes to be. Then I will go in and layer up the lighter colours and then work in to that in creating more edges and more variation in colour and tone. So to summarise, remember to look for those dark shadow shapes within the different shapes of lichen, remember to build up lots of layers of colour and tone. Look for the edges, the hard edges and the soft edges, where you want to graduate out your tone from light to dark. And also think about the different textures that you can put into different types of lichen. So you might want to combine scribble kind of marks or dots or dashes, depending on what kind of textures you are seeing. So I hope that you've enjoyed drawing along with me. And if you would like to find the full workshop of drawing the kingfisher, remember the links are in the description below. And you are very welcome to come and join me for live workshops. I also have an archive of recorded workshops that are available. And so all of the links that you need for those are below. I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you again for another workshop soon. Remember to like the video, comment and subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye bye.